Hello and welcome back to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today I am delighted to welcome back onto the show a company we have had on many times in the past. This time, however, we're moving to a different Oliver. It's Oliver Rooney. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Toby, and I'm really pleased to be here. One of the long line of VoxSmart guests you've had. Saving the best of us, no doubt.
Well, I'm sure it is. And look, listen, it's always great having VoxSmart on the show, and I think it's been a really colourful couple of years for you guys. We've seen some brilliant stuff you've been doing. I think the company's done exceptionally well through that. We've seen extraordinary growth. I remember, speaking to you maybe even 3-4 years ago, and just it being a sort of very young and evolutionary company, and just to see the growth has been incredible. So we'll come on to all of that. We'll talk a little bit about what's next and the future journey as well. But before we do that, Oliver, tell us a little bit about yourself and VoxSmart as a whole, because I know whilst most people have seen every episode of this show, there might be some who've missed it. So tell us a little bit about Oliver Rooney and tell us a bit about VoxSmart, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Oliver Rooney, CTO at VoxSmart. I've been at VoxSmart for just about 5 years. My background really is in information security management and cloud infrastructure. So I've spent the best part of the last 20 years, I think, working in SaaS businesses or around financial services institutions on the commodity side, also banking, working either building cloud infrastructure, deploying and operating SaaS systems for trading, or working on information security management when I was at Deloitte for a couple of years before I joined VoxSmart. So it's a lot of experience around sort of software, SaaS, and financial services. And yeah, I've been really pleased to be with VoxSmart for the last 5 years, going through what you say is a really interesting and exciting growth story there. VoxSmart has gone from being not quite 3 men in a shed when I joined, but about 20, 30
not
people.
far off.
No, I mean, they interviewed me originally as Chief Information Security Officer, and one of the first things they said, we're really sorry to take you to this office because the physical security isn't what you'd be used to in a bank or something. I was working with central banks and stuff. They were right, they had a shared office space and the door didn't even lock. So it was quite a small company mentality. But it's a very exciting growth story over the last 5 years.
Talk to me about that sort of, as you say, and as they said at that sort of stage, coming into a business with the security of a door not locking, that must have been a real culture shock to you. What was it like? I'm always interested in hearing people who've been in, you mentioned some of the institutions you worked in before there in its own, to move into that and take that plunge into it. And there'll be other people watching this who are, what some might call institutionalized in some of the organizations they're in, and it is for some people, and it isn't for others moving into that. You find some people really struggling, but you've thrived. What's that journey been like for you?
It's been very exciting, but then I think it kind of reminds me a lot when I first started working in IT, which was back in 2002. So I'd been a research scientist before that, and decided to change career completely, and I started then with another small software business that was again about the same size as VoxSmart, maybe a little bit larger. So in a lot of ways, coming back to VoxSmart felt like coming back to something that I knew quite well, rather than working in an institution with 200,000 people globally, which is daunting in its own ways. Yeah, okay. So I think it's really good to work in a small dynamic business. There's a really sort of interesting cutoff point where you can still get everybody from that business into the same pub, and I think that has a great kind of atmosphere there. You know everybody, you work closely with everybody, and everybody there has a really big impact on the success of the business and how it grows. So I think it's you've got to be ready for it, of course, because you have no idea what you're going to be doing from day to day. You're going to pitch into everything, and that's hugely exciting, very energizing.
And it's also pretty good for that pub as well when you get the VoxSmart lot into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no coincidence, I'm sure, the number of meetings that happened in there.
Quite right too. So VoxSmart are in a really interesting space. I think that sort of surveillance world over the last, probably more than 10 years, but particularly over the last couple of years has really lit up, and we've seen a number of changes and developments in the marketplace that have, I think, really, I sort of hesitate to say fallen in the lap of VoxSmart, but it's really sort of played to the strengths of the business. And I think people have recognised the value that you guys are bringing to organisations, and how essential you've become to the DNA, the fabric of the industry, full stop. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of compliance and regulation and surveillance within the space, and where we're at the moment.
Sure, you're right. It has been very interesting, Toby, because it's been kind of a slow evolution on the regulatory side, but it's been, on a technological point of view, it's been extremely innovative for quite a while now. And you're going back to sort of 2011, looking at the introduction of mobile recording, or even further, 2006, and that's where VoxSmart started. VoxSmart has had this interesting trajectory that has kind of paralleled a lot of the technological trends and sort of market trends that we've seen. And so obviously it's no coincidence. It's very intentional on our part to kind of grow along with and lead some of those developments. But you've seen this shift from, okay, well, capture is enough. As long as you're record keeping, it's fine, because you could go and look at the tapes, and you could look at the pieces of paper and the meeting notes, and you would be able to work out what had happened. And very quickly, you can work out as an organization that isn't really good enough at all. It's not after the fact that you need to know, it's before the fact or during. So there was a huge drive over the years to bring a lot of technology and automation to bear. And the original approaches to that, using sort of rule-based systems, keyword matching and that kind of stuff, which some people still use, really were kind of almost more harm than they were good, really, because people joke in the industry that it's not really surveillance, it's just false positive generation. All you're doing is generating alerts for people to say, no, that's garbage, that's garbage, that's garbage, that's garbage. So you have a team of people whose job has gone from looking at comms to looking at false alerts and closing them all down. And then there's a really sort of inflection point where people start to apply AI methods, generally machine learning and natural language processing, where you can really, really start to cut those false positive rates down. And you can really start to give people a tremendously powerful tool that turns your compliance team of a few people, tens of people, not from just false positive closing, but really into kind of understanding the depth of that, understanding the risk to the business, and being able to put, comms together from dozens of channels and react in hours, not in terms of days or weeks or months, in terms of gathering the data manually. So yeah, it's been tremendously exciting, and VoxSmart has paralleled those industry trends in its own trajectory and its own growth. We've started off on the capture side of things. We've acquired the old phonetic trading business to look at communication surveillance and trade reconstruction, right on the cusp of that becoming really something that was technically feasible and doable and was coming to market. And then more recently acquiring the green key natural language processing assets to sort of, again, put us sort of one step ahead in terms of what's really the best in the market in terms of understanding, that lexicon, that vocabulary, and extracting the value from that data.
I think this is really interesting for me, because it's just it creates a really positive picture of what I think is moving the needle for businesses at the moment. It's as you mentioned there, and just hearing you talking about the sort of value you've been able to bring. We're talking a lot about productivity. We're talking about managing the efficiency, and I think when businesses are there, and what I've seen as a trend over a significant amount of time, but particularly over the last couple of years, is people are really investing in efficiency, and we've been living in a world that is full of friction, full of things there that create challenges where not necessary. And I love the fact of what you guys are about there is saying that these are some major problems, some major inefficiencies in your business, and this is how we're coming in there and are able to be a new broom that sweeps clean, so to speak, in terms of what you're looking at. Is that something which you see as being very much at the heart of the strategy for what you guys are looking to achieve?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different prongs or directions that we're working on at the moment, and one of them very much is efficiency, right? You look at the consumer world, and you look at how the natural language tools like chatbots and so forth have really kind of enhanced the efficiency of customer service businesses, because frankly, a lot of the times, when people phone up, they want to answer simple questions. It's quite easy to do that with NLP tools. And you might not think that that has an application in, financial services or in, compliance, but it certainly does. The problem is more complex, but you're still trying to solve a similar kind of problem. There's a lot of customer interactions for some institutions that are just not profitable, that you don't really want to be dealing with on a face-to-face basis. You want to push them down into something that is just as responsive and gives people a great service, but doesn't consume as much time. And, there are businesses right now who have interns frantically copying from Excel sheets into WhatsApp groups to push information out, or they're scripting that somehow, sharpen up your VBA skills and get some macros to do that. But we think there's much better ways of doing that using NLP-based sort of chatbot type of technology, for example. And so we're looking in that as a direction. The compliance technologies themselves, they're not perfect. So there is always going to be an element of false positives. And you want that, because you don't want the automated systems to be hiding risk from you. They want, you want the automated system to surface risk so that you can make a value judgment, right? Because human judgment still, is vastly superior to anything you can do with AI when it comes to something as complex and nuanced as risk for a financial institution, for operational risk. So what we're looking at there is kind of, how do you make that workflow as efficient as possible? Because there's a lot that, that person may be doing, and on a day-to-day basis, which actually they can do faster if they had sort of workflow assistance built into the technology. And now, obviously, you've got to be super careful. You don't want the technology to just learn that on a Friday afternoon after 3 p.m. we close everything faster because we want to go to the pub. But at the same time, you can learn about the trends and data. It can easily happen with unsupervised learning, right? AI systems have learned all kinds of crazy stuff in the past. So, you need to make sure that you've got a useful, auditable tool that you can train to do what you want. But we still think there's an enormous amount in terms of optimization. One of the companies that we sort of partner with, they've actually developed their own complete sort of almost their own programming language for addressing, workflow management and alert management. And they're in a different sector, and they're working at sort of 3 orders of magnitude larger. But we think there's a huge sort of opportunity to innovate there. But I don't think that the biggest kind of innovations and the biggest savings in terms of efficiency, they're not really going to come within the compliance space, I don't think, because that's such a small part of the business. You look at a financial institution, risk management, the first line of defense, second line of defense, they're doing what's required by regulation and what's required by their risk management frameworks. But there's huge additional efficiencies to be gained by analyzing the natural language data that the front office is capturing for compliance purposes, but maybe not yet realizing the value from. And that's, to us, by far the most exciting part of where we think VoxSmart's going to go.
I think it's really interesting you talk there about just some of the amazing inefficiencies, within it there, where you talk about interns sort of copying things through and chucking it through into WhatsApp groups and such. Like it's staggering to think that in this day and age that's still there. You guys have been innovative from the start. You've looked at things differently from the start, and I think it's quite interesting when you see those sort of small innovative companies sort of then sort of stay in their lane. What's very interesting about what you've spoken to me about before is this is an evolutionary business, and it's about making sure you continue to look at your customer problems and you continue to evolve around that, because it'd be very easy just to sort of stay in that lane and have been micro specialist in banging that drum and slowly turning more and more people over to the inefficiencies of all of that sort of flavor, so to speak. Tell me what's driven the sort of thirst for innovation behind VoxSmart and some of the problems you're solving and what that looks like in the future.
I think that the main thing is, ambitions for growth. Of course, we're growing rapidly as it is, but we want to sustain and extend that growth, year on year. And we're just looking at ways that we can solve our customers' problems better. We've always been a customer-led organization, obsessed with solving those real business problems. We're not, if you like, a pure tech-led business. So we have a lot of conversations with our customers, with representatives from industry, with our own kind of subject matter experts to try and work out what problems there are that can be solved. Because, whenever somebody says, nobody can do this, well, if you can, then you should, right? Because there's a huge opportunity here. So we're always on the lookout for interesting conversations where our customers come to us and say, we have this huge problem, right? That's it's exciting for us to be able to try and solve those things. But also, we have a culture here that really kind of favors innovative thinking. You've spoken to Adrienne before. We're a sort of values-based organization, and we are, passionate about what we can do within our space, and also how we can expand it. So we have a lot of people with great ideas internally. As I said, we have our subject matter experts from the industry that we work with, and our internal technology experts, and getting those people together always produces great ideas. Now, those great ideas are not always going to be successful, but part of what the business needs to do is evaluate those and try them, right? So, we try a lot of things that aren't really, they're not going to see the light of day as a real, solution in the market, but you've got to try them to find out. So we have, teams working just on kind of crazy ideas.
How does that work? I mean, I love that sound of things, and I'm a big reader and studier of sort of innovation as a whole, and I love this sort of concept of people pushing it. And I think it's it was coined years ago, wasn't it, with the Google's 20% time? But it's that was always just to me a marketing ploy, because I think any decent company who was serious about innovation gave people the time to try and fail and such like. But it's in a number of different companies, it's easier said than done. There's pressure on results, there's pressure on delivery. I love the fact that you guys have always been, had that at the sort of core in the DNA of the business. You mentioned before you're a customer focused business, but I also think you're a people focused business in your organization, and that's always sort of screamed out to me about conversations I've had with everyone across the business, that's been there, and people trusted to innovate, to provide those solutions to it. You mentioned something very interesting there about saying, it's impossible, no one can deliver that, and how it sort of lights the fuse to say, right, let's be the people who can do that. In terms of that, sometimes there can be some, because there are the tasks that can't be changed, etc. And in terms of risk and reward and investment of time versus return of end product behind that, how do you make the right call between how much time is invested and how much time is flushed at the same time?
Very interesting kind of thing to optimize, and I think our approach is just not to overthink it, because at what point are you going to be certain that is the next big thing for the market? Well, that's going to take years for you to know that. You've got to try a lot of things, and people say, fail fast and don't be afraid to fail, but that to me is a very negative way of looking at it, right? An experiment that you learn from is not a failure. It may fail to be the next biggest innovation in RegTech or something, but it's valuable that you found out that isn't the thing to focus on. So we look at fast prototyping, internal demos. We have a team, as I said, dedicated to tech POCs and just looking at things that we could do, right? Is it possible for us to analyze a graph with 1 billion nodes of communications? How long does it take us to do that? How quickly can you query it? Do we have 1 billion nodes of graph data that we want to analyze right now? No, right? But we easily could, when you're looking at some of the growth of our customer platforms and their volumes of communication. So it's important for us to know that. Now, if it turns out that there's no tech out there that can do it reasonably, well, okay, that's not something we try and do. But you've got to try it to find out. And experimentation is, if you like, the critical step, right? Because anybody can have ideas, and lots of people do have ideas. If you can't turn that idea into something concrete, it will never go anywhere. But as soon as it is something concrete, people will start asking new questions about it. They'll want to see other things. We have a customer here that's just about to go live with our trade reconstruction product in the next few weeks, and they've come to us today actually and say, do you know what? We've just realized we have this other huge problem that we think you might be the people to solve. And we look at it, and we look at each other, and we look at our other SMEs, and they go, that's not just a problem for them, that's a problem for every bank on the street, as they say. So it's suddenly there's a lot of interest on solving that particular problem.
So talk to me about how that comes up with it. So you're there and you're working with that client. And that client's, this to me is a really interesting piece where they say, look, we think you might be the people who are able to solve that issue. quite often there's a hubris around institutions to want to to do that and solve it themselves, etc. How do you work with your customers to allow that to be part of the relationship where they'll say, VoxSmart's the business to go to help us with that problem, which they don't do. I mean, it's very obvious to go to companies to say, look, there's a company that can, we can take something off the shelf and it can fix that problem we've got. To go in there and say these will be the people to not only have the solution to it, but to invent the solution to it alongside it. That shows great relationship and trust from from that business. How does that come about? How have you got to that stage?
It's really interesting because with some organizations, it would be very difficult to get to that point of view. They'd want to look at your product and then try and recreate it. And I think the only way you can win that trust is by delivering it. So, that particular customer, we've had issues deploying that product at times, and we've come back to them with solutions, right? And when they say we can't do this, we're like, well, we could do that, or we could do the other thing. You've actually got to show people that you're capable of doing it. You've got to deliver the results to them. Otherwise, you don't build that trust. And the other thing is, you've got to show that you actually have the talent and the skills and the people to innovate, right? So you can't just be going there with a tired old product and expect then to ask, people won't ask you to solve exciting new problems, but we can constantly show them the innovations that we're working on now and the problems that we've solved on their project. And coupled with the way that organization works, the relationships and the individuals, it's very natural for them to come to us first. In fact, they regularly do. And whether it's a data problem or a new regulatory issue that their current systems can't solve, then it's a great place. It's a partnership. So we see all of our customer relationships as a partnership. We're often deploying quite complex solutions for them, solutions that they have never used before. When you're thinking about a trade reconstruction type of system, there aren't a lot of people out there who've ever built or deployed one of those. So you've got to build it on mutual trust, because there's a lot of integration work, a lot that happens on a complicated project like that, and it can very easily, some of these organizations anyway, it can very easily kind of sour a bit into, well, that's my job and that's your job, but you'll never both succeed together if that's the case. It's one of our values again is collaboration, and if you aren't collaborating with customers, you're going to disappoint them.
That's a really interesting piece, isn't it? Because I think collaboration isn't a unique value. It'll be stuck on walls at various different companies all over the world, I would suggest. But at the same time, that collaboration is usually seen as an internal piece. How do we work together to do it? What I love from the way you've just intimated that is we're talking about collaboration from a client perspective as well. Oliver, what I want to ask you actually is just you mentioned there about the teams, and you have people there who are focused on this. Is that are those teams exclusively sort of like an innovation lab, or are they working exclusively on that, or are you giving your numerous different people in the team the ability to look at this and cross-pollinate and do various different bits and pieces technologically in their careers within VoxSmart?
Yeah, we try and do both. So we do have a team reports directly to me as CTO, responsible for like the big innovation projects, but we staff that partly via sort of internal rotation or secondments. So we'll bring people into that team from other teams. Maybe they have a great idea already. Maybe they have particular skills in an area that we want to look at, from a strategic point of view. But also, we're very clear to all of our product-focused development teams that they own the product and the direction it's going to go, right? They're not following any kind of centralized diktat of, it's got to look like this or it's got to look like that. So they expect to be able to evolve the technology that they're working on, not in any direction that they want, but in any direction that they can kind of build the consensus or just a critical mass that it's the right thing to do. So we actually have a lot of trust in our development team leads, and we expect a lot from them in terms of responsibility when it comes to innovation themselves. So for all of our products, we have a dedicated technical lead, and that person is responsible for design and architecture of the platform. Really, it's full depth, right? We're a SaaS platform, so we're talking everything from the mobile app right the way to the bottom of the AWS stack. And yeah, rather than telling them what to do, we trust them to come up with solutions. So You know, we're going to be talking next week with one of the dev teams who wants to start moving a lot of stuff onto AWS serverless infrastructure. Now, you know, that's fine. It fits in with our technology strategy, and it's a new step for us. But, you know, why would you veto something that they think is a great idea? Because it's, you know, they're close to the problems and they're close to the tech. So yeah, it's really built on trust and expertise, and a lot of conversations, of course.
Do you know what I really enjoy about this, Oliver, is that you know, I've spoken to Adrienne and Oliver Blower a lot on, you know, on this, about the culture of VoxSmart, and to actually see it now, you know, through your words, sort of, you know, embodied a little bit, and you know, I know that this business is, your business is all about communication at the crux of it. And what I think there is brilliantly throughout, you know, the leadership team in your company is a great channels of communication that allow innovation to happen. And I think, you know, if you've got that right, you can do extraordinary things, which sort of feeds very much into the business. It's really, really interesting just to sort of hear it and see it and shape it all back in, you know, together, to see how the magic happens.
Yeah, I think
we've opened up Pandora's box.
Shouldn't have told anybody, it's our secrets, right? But,
Oliver, talk to me about you know, we've been running through this all the way through. There's a sort of, you know, very clear map about where you've come and what you're doing and the problems you're solving. Moving further forward, there's a lot of evolution in the industry, in the RegTech space, the compliance space. You know, there's all sorts of, we were talking beforehand about, you know, even areas that now which are becoming more and more to the, you know, to the forefront in terms of crypto and everything that goes on through there, which are challenges ahead. But talk to me about the sort of medium, long-term roadmap. I know there's loads of different things which you do to evolve the business from what it is into what it becomes, and, you know, or what it was into what it is, and into what it becomes, you know, further down the line. What have we got in store? What's happening in the market? What's changing in the world? What's changing in VoxSmart? Wet or whistle?
Okay, right. So I think that, yeah, there's a really kind of interesting inflection point in where RegTech or whatever compliance technology is going to go. Because realistically, how far can you reduce risk, and how much value can you provide just from risk reduction? You can only reduce it so far, and, you know, technology and regulation and all these things, they only have a certain limited impact. You know, from a trivial point of view, comm surveillance, no amount of surveillance in AI and NLP is going to analyze communications from a burner phone. Right, so there's going to be a certain amount of activity that you can just never see, you can never deal with, and so there's a floor below which, you know, you can't reduce risk below that floor ever, no matter what your technology is. So you've got to then look at where's the next value going to come from these products, and you look into the comms and you look into the data and you start to say, well what is in there, because it's an unimaginably huge treasure trove of information that at the moment isn't really being analyzed, or it's only really being analyzed so that people can find bad stuff in it. And like, well, let's stop looking for bad stuff and let's start trying to look for good stuff instead. So, you know, one of our kind of pivots has been with the Green Key acquisition is to focus the AI, the machine learning, the NLP tools, not from finding risk, but to finding opportunities. So, you know, our NLP stack now can be used for saying, well, okay, let's see the opportunities that maybe you missed, right? At least you're identifying the opportunities that were there, because then you can see, you know, is there more upside in this relationship or that relationship? Where should I focus my efforts? And that's very, very simple, just looking on a com by com basis. Like, well, that's a deal that you didn't do. Right, so let's think about why not. But then you can go one step further than that and start looking at communications and communications metadata. And you can start mapping the communications relationships. Is why we're looking at graphs, right? So you look at an enormous amount of information, volumes of communication, topics. You know, why are we talking to that organization about this subject, and what does that mean about the profitability of our relationship? Is it volume related? Is it specific topics? Is it timeliness? Is it related to market events or news or whatever it is? So you're starting to broaden and broaden and broaden the scope of the data and synthesize that back together, and then compare it with some real sort of business metrics of business performance, metrics of individual performance, and say, how can we see and what can we learn from that communications data about how to do our jobs better, how to make more money simply. And we think that is, you know, that's the next step, because the comms are already there. You know, the information is already there. It's just about extracting what there is. And it doesn't have to be, vast amounts of information and huge detailed insights. It can just be very small incremental gains. But nevertheless, when you set those aside, sort of set them against the value that comes from risk reduction, they can look huge, I think. You know, small optimizations in people's workflow, small optimizations in profitability or comms, timeliness or whatever could have a really big impact.
This sort of sings to my heart, sings to my favorite story. I love that, one of our core values as a business is Kaizen. And that whole concept of continuous improvement, I think, is at the very kernel of outstanding businesses, outstanding performance. And I think those incremental gains is something which again is something I fully subscribe and believe into. And I love the narrative of what you're talking about there, which is switching from just finding risk to finding opportunities. And I wrote that down as you were saying it. It suddenly just sort of went into.
And I just said, get that on a t-shirt, Toby.
Yeah, definitely. So, it definitely has a t-shirt, has t-shirt potential to it for sure. I'm gonna we can see the next line of branded VoxSmart t-shirts with that over the shoulder blade, surely. So it's a real, it all sort of ties into being just an exceptionally exciting time, for yourself, for the business, and actually for the industry. I think there's this inflection point where it's a very, very interesting time, full stop, with everything that comes into it. And we've explored some exciting opportunities there about where the business moves and goes further forward. So Oliver, tell me who should be talking to you, who should be reaching out to VoxSmart at the moment. What sort of problems are they likely to be having, and what's the best place to get in touch with you?
Anybody who's dealing with communications data or trade data, trying to match the two up, trying to analyze them, they should certainly be in touch with us, because we're across mobile comms capture right the way through to front office natural language processing toolkits. So I think if there's anybody out there, classes that we work in, including crypto now, and who wants to get in touch, then they should certainly get in touch either directly with me or through the sales team. Right? There's a lot of people here at VoxSmart waiting to speak to you, and I think probably the best people to get in touch with are our sales team, probably through our website, I guess.
Oliver, listen, that's fantastic, and please do reach out and get in touch with those guys as mentioned there as well. It is always a pleasure having VoxSmart on the show. There's a load of things that always just sort of prick my ears up, have me really on the edge of my seat, and I just love seeing, as I said before, how it all molds together to create something there that I think is really special. So congratulations, keep up the good work, and lovely having another Oliver on the show.
Thanks so much, Toby. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Listen, thanks for watching, and we will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.